My name is Lena. I'm 27 years old, and I live in the city now, but my childhood was spent in this little place in Oregon called Grey Valley. It was a real backwater, like time forgot it. It was a good 40-minute drive from the nearest highway, surrounded by nothing but endless pine trees in this dry, scrubby field. When I was a kid, every summer my folks and I would go out there and stay in this beat-up old cabin that my grandpa left us. There wasn't much around the cabin, just this narrow dirt road leading out to the world and this rundown barn with the door always hanging half open, making this low, moaning sound when the wind blew through it. My parents said it was just the wind, but I always felt like it was calling my name. I first heard it when I was 8. It was a muggy August night. The air was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and even the mosquitoes were too lazy to buzz. I was sleeping in this little attic bedroom with the window open, and it was pitch black outside. At first, I thought it was a dream, this whispering sound in my ear, like someone was calling me from far away, Lena. Lena. The sound would break up, like it was being torn apart by the wind. I sat up and rubbed my eyes, but the sound didn't stop, it actually got clearer. I crawled over to the window and squinted out. The moonlight was hitting the field, and the dark shape of the barn was just squatting there, like a silent giant. Then I saw it, a figure standing in the barn doorway. It wasn't my mom or dad. This figure was skinny as a rail, and its head was tilted to the side, like its neck was broken. It didn't move, just stood there, staring at the cabin. I was so freaked out my heart was pounding in my chest, but I didn't wake up my parents because I was afraid they'd just say I was having a nightmare. The next morning, I finally got the nerve to run out to the barn, but there was nothing there, just some flattened grass, like something heavy had been lying there. Over the next few years, that sound and that figure became my summer regulars. It was always at night, always coming from the direction of the barn, sometimes just a whisper, sometimes this moaning sound like crying. I asked my parents about it, but they always said it was the wind or maybe some wild cats. But when I was 13, things changed. One night, my parents went into town to run some errands, and I was home alone. Around 11 p.m., the whispering started again, but this time it wasn't my name, it was a word, come in. Come in. I stared out the window, and the barn door was actually open, the inside was as black as pitch. I don't know where I got the guts, but I grabbed a flashlight, put on my shoes, and walked out to the barn. The door creaked in the wind, and my hair was blowing all over the place. I shined the flashlight inside. The beam landed on a bunch of rusty farm tools and some broken planks of wood, and then it stopped. There was something in the corner, hunched down, looking kind of human but not quite. Its head slowly turned towards me, and its eyes glowed yellow in the light, like a cat's, but the face was all wrinkles, like dried up tree bark, and there was no mouth, just this black hole. I screamed and stumbled backward, dropping the flashlight, which was just bouncing around on the ground. The thing didn't chase me, though. It just stood up and slowly walked deeper into the barn. I ran back to the house, locked the door, and didn't sleep a wink all night. As soon as it was daylight, I made my parents take me back to the city. They just thought I was spooked and didn't ask too many questions. After that, I never went back to Grey Valley. My parents sold the cabin after my grandpa passed away, but I heard that the new owners moved out in less than a month, saying the place was creepy and something wasn't right there. Now I'm 27 years old, and last night I had a dream. I was standing in front of the barn again, and that sound started up, Lena. Come in. I woke up in a cold sweat, and my phone screen was lit up with a text message from a number I didn't recognize. It just said one word, come back. I didn't reply to the message, but I know one thing for sure, some things just never let you go. My name's Kyle, and I'm 24 years old. I was born and raised in this little town in Mississippi, right close to the river. That river was everything to us around there, fishing in the summer, watching it freeze over in the winter. Me and my older brother, Jake, we practically lived down there when we were kids. Right by the river, there's this old patch of woods, trees growing so thick it's like a wall. Folks around town always said it used to be an old Indian burial ground, but nobody ever really looked into it. Grandpa used to warn us, y'all stay away from that river after sundown. There's some things sleeping that's best left undisturbed. I always figured that was just him trying to scare us kids, until the summer I turned 15. It was one of them dog day afternoons, hotter than blue blazes, and me and Jake went down to the river with our fishing poles. The sun had just dipped down, but there was still a little red left in the sky, and we figured we'd fish a little longer. The river was still as glass, not even a nibble. I was about to reel in my line when Jake suddenly said, "Did you hear that?" I kind of froze and listened. At first, all I could hear was the wind rustling the leaves, and then I heard it, this low humming sound, like somebody was talking way off in the distance, but you couldn't make out what they were saying. "Probably just the wind," I said, but Jake was frowning, looking over at the woods on the other side of the river. I followed his gaze, and them woods were dark as a tomb, the shadows of the trees swaying like they were moving. That's when the sound changed. It became a clear word, "Kyle." I jumped up so fast my fishing pole almost went in the water. "Did you hear that?" I asked Jake, and he nodded, white as a ghost. "It said your name." We started packing up our stuff to leave, but that sound didn't stop. It was like it was following us. "Kyle. Kyle." Getting closer and closer, like it was coming right out of the water. I glanced back, and this thin fog was rolling in over the river. And in that fog, I could see this figure, standing straight up, the water just reaching his knees. I grabbed Jake and we took off running for the house. He tripped and fell halfway there, scraped his knee up pretty bad, but he didn't even cry out, just kept on running. We didn't tell our folks when we got home. They'd thought we'd gone plumb crazy. After that, I didn't go near that river for months. But come fall, Jake kept bugging me to go back. He said he kept dreaming about them woods, and in his dreams, somebody was calling him over. I finally gave in, but I took a hunting knife with me, just in case. That night, the sky was cloudy and looked like it was about to pour down rain. We stood by the river, and then we heard the sound again, this time calling, "Jake. Jake." I gripped that knife tight, but Jake, he was like he was in a trance. He took a couple of steps towards the river. I yanked him back, and he looked at me, tears welling up in his eyes. "It said it knows me, Kyle." That's when the fog rolled in again, thick as cotton, and that figure on the river appeared again. This time, I got a good look at him. He was wearing these tattered clothes, and his face looked all waterlogged and rotted, with these two black holes for eyes. He started walking towards us, but the water wasn't even rippling. I yelled and tried to pull Jake away, but he shook me off and just stood there. I didn't know what else to do, so I ran back home to get my parents. When we got back with some of the neighbors, Jake was gone. All that was left on the riverbank were his shoes, floating on the water. The police searched for a whole week, but they didn't find nothing. Folks around town said he must have drowned, but I know better. I ain't heard that sound since, but every time I drive past that river, I still get this feeling like something's watching me from under the water. I moved away when I was 24, but just the other day, I got this letter in the mail with no return address. Inside, there was just one picture, the river with the fog rolling in, and standing there in the mist were two figures. One was me, and the other was Jake. My name's Sam, and I'm 29 years old. I grew up in this little coastal town down in Maine. Ever since I was a kid, I'd hear the old folks talk about the old lighthouse just outside of town. It's perched right on the cliffs, and it's guided countless ships over the years, but there's been a few that never made it back, too. Folks around town say that lighthouse has its secrets, especially on stormy nights. When I was 16, I saw for myself just how wrong things could get out there. It was an October night, and the wind was howling something fierce, felt like it could rip the roof right off your house. The waves were crashing against the cliffs like thunder. Me and my two buddies, Tom and Beth, we'd made plans to go explore the lighthouse. We were at that age where you think you're too smart for all the old wives' tales. Figured the grown-ups' warnings were just a bunch of hooey. The lighthouse had been abandoned for years, the light was out, and the door was locked up tight, but we knew about this broken window on the side we could squeeze through. Armed with flashlights and a bottle of some whiskey we'd swiped, we headed out. Once we climbed inside the lighthouse, it was cold as a witch's tit, and the air was thick with the smell of salt and mildew. The spiral staircase creaked under our weight, and the walls were covered in peeling paint. We made our way up to the top, to the lantern room. It was empty except for this rusty old lampstand. Beth joked, "Maybe we'll see some ghost ships." Tom laughed at her, but I noticed something out on the water. This dark shape looked like a boat, but no lights, no nothing. "Hey, look at that," I said, pointing out the window. They came over, and the dark shape was still there, like it was painted on the fog. Just then, we heard footsteps coming up the stairs. Slow and heavy, like someone was dragging their feet. The three of us froze, our flashlight beams jumping around the stairwell, but we didn't see a thing. The footsteps stopped, and then there was this low sigh, sounded like the wind but not quite. Beth grabbed my arm, whispering, "Let's get out of here." But Tom, he had to be a tough guy, yelled out, "Who's there?" Nobody answered, but the air in the lantern room changed, like all of a sudden there was another person breathing in there with us. I looked back out the window, and the dark shape was gone. Instead, there was a figure standing right on the edge of the cliff outside the lighthouse. In the moonlight, he was wearing an old-fashioned sailor's uniform, and his face was white as a sheet, looking down. I blinked, and he was gone. Tom was still yelling, but Beth was already pulling me back down the stairs. And then we heard the footsteps again, this time faster, like they were chasing us. We burst out into the night, the wind practically tore our ears off, but those footsteps didn't stop. They were circling the lighthouse, like something was running around us. I glanced back, and reaching out of that broken window at the bottom of the tower was a hand, pale and skinny, with fingernails black as coal. Right then, I swear I heard someone call my name, Sam. It sounded like it was coming from the ocean, all waterlogged and muffled. We ran back to town and didn't tell a soul. The next day, Tom came down with a high fever, and Beth said she kept dreaming about that hand. I tried to forget about it, but that voice just kept echoing in my head. This year, when I was 29, I went back home for a visit. I stopped by the lighthouse on the way. Now it's all fenced off with barbed wire, and there are danger, keep out signs everywhere. I stared up at that broken window, and I swear I heard that sigh again in the wind, Sam. I didn't stick around. I just got back in my car and drove off. But in my rearview mirror, I saw a figure standing by the window, looking down, like it was waiting for me to come back. My name's Amy, and I'm 25 years old. I grew up in this little town in Iowa that was pretty much surrounded by cornfields. Right out behind our house was this huge field of corn that would grow taller than me in the summer, like a big green maze. My dad always told me, "Now, Amy, don't you go running off into that cornfield by yourself. It's too easy to get lost in there." But when I was 10 that summer, my curiosity got the better of me, and let me tell you, I ain't gone near a cornfield the same way since. It was an August afternoon, and the sun was just about to set, making the sky all fiery red. I was playing hide-and-seek with Tony, the kid from next door, and he took off into the cornfield. I didn't think nothing of it and followed right after him. The corn leaves were rustling all around me, and the air smelled like dirt and that sweet corn smell. I called out his name, but there was no answer, just the sound of the wind blowing through the stalks. I walked around for a bit, and then things started feeling off. The sun hadn't completely gone down yet, but it was getting dark around me like it was nighttime. I stopped and tried to figure out which way to go, but them corn stalks were packed and tighter than sardines, and I couldn't tell east from west. That's when I heard this sound, like a low humming, drifting over from way off. I figured it was just Tony messing with me, so I started walking towards the sound, but the closer I got, the creepier it felt. That sound didn't sound like no human voice. It was more like a bagpipe, or maybe a cat screaming, and it kinda hurt my ears. I pushed my way through the corn stalks and came to this little clearing in the middle of the field. Standing there was a scarecrow. It was pretty old, made with a wooden frame and some tattered clothes hanging off it. Its head was just a burlap sack with these two crooked black eyes painted on it. What was weird was the footprints on the ground, circles and circles around that scarecrow, like someone had been walking around it for a long time. I stared at that scarecrow, and it felt like it was looking right back at me, even though it wasn't moving. That humming sound just stopped all of a sudden, and the air got so quiet I could hear my own heart beating. I turned around to run, but then I heard this snap behind me, like a branch breaking. I whipped around, and the scarecrow was gone. That little clearing was empty, except for them footprints. I was so spooked my legs felt like jelly. I turned and ran, them corn leaves scratching my arms all up, but I didn't care. As I was running, I heard footsteps behind me, not too fast, not too slow, just keeping pace, like it was playing with me. I finally burst out of that cornfield, and it was pitch black out. Tony was standing in my backyard, staring at me like I was crazy. "Where'd you go?" he asked. "I've been looking all over for you." I didn't answer him, just looked back at the cornfield. It was all dark and shadowy, but I swear I saw two black eyes glinting in there, like they were just hanging in the air. I ain't set foot in a cornfield since. But about 15 years later, I went back home to help my folks clean out the house. One night, I was standing in the backyard, looking out at that field. The wind was blowing, and I heard that humming sound again, real low, like a whisper. I grabbed a flashlight and shined it out there. The beam landed right on that scarecrow, standing in the same old spot, but its head was tilted to the side, like it was smiling at me. I blinked, and when I looked again, it was gone. Just the corn leaves moving in the wind, looking like they were waving at. My name's Noah, and I'm 26 years old. I grew up in this little town up in the mountains in Colorado. Our place was right at the foot of the mountains, surrounded by nothing but pine trees and rocks. The closest neighbor was a good half-mile away. My folks liked the quiet, but I always had this feeling like something in the mountains was watching us. When I was 11 that winter, I figured out that feeling wasn't just in my head. It was a night when the snow was coming down hard, and the wind was howling like a banshee. Me and my folks were sitting in the living room, the wood stove was cranking out the heat, and we had some old movie playing on TV. Around 9 o'clock, we heard this knocking on the door. Bang, bang, bang. 3 times, real sharp, like someone was hitting a drum. Dad frowned and stood up, said, "Who in tarnation would be coming out here in this weather?" He went over to the door, pulled back the curtain to look out the window, but then he just shook his head. Nobody's there. We figured it was just a tree branch getting knocked around by the wind, but about 5 minutes later, the knocking came again. Same 3 times, bang, 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 but louder this time. Mom told me to go check the back door. I wasn't too keen on the idea, but I went anyway. It was colder than a well digger's behind back there. I looked out the glass, and the snow was just piling up on the ground, nothing but the wind whipping the snow around. But as soon as I turned to go back, that knocking started again. Bang, 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 right from the back door, like someone was pounding on it with their fist. I ran back to the living room. Dad had already grabbed his rifle, and Mom was standing by the wood stove, clutching the phone, but the signal had been down for hours by then. The knocking didn't stop. It went back and forth between the front and back doors, like it was playing some kind of twisted game of hide and seek. Dad threw open the front door, held his rifle up, and yelled, "Who's out there? Show yourself." The wind rushed in, and snowflakes hit him in the face, but there wasn't nothing out there. He closed the door, locked it up tight, but he looked real uneasy. Then, the knocking stopped, and it turned into this scratching sound, like fingernails dragging across wood, coming from all around the house. I climbed up onto the couch and wiped the frost off the window. I saw this shadow out in the snow. It was shaped like a person, but its arms were way too long, dangling down to the ground. It was walking around the house, its head down, like it was looking for something. The scratching got faster and faster. Dad told me to get behind the couch. He and Mom stood by the door, Dad holding that rifle tight. Suddenly, everything went quiet. Even the wind seemed to stop. I peeked up from behind the couch and saw that shadow outside the window had stopped. It was standing in the front yard, staring right at the window. It didn't have a face, just this black mass, but I knew it was looking at me. Dad fired his rifle. Glass went everywhere, but that thing didn't even flinch. The bullets just seemed to disappear into thin air. The next second, it was gone. Not even a footprint left in the snow. The next morning, Dad checked the house. There were scratch marks all over the doors, deep as if someone had taken a knife to him. We didn't tell anyone in town. They wouldn't have believed us anyway. After that, every time it snowed at night, I could swear I heard that scratching sound in my ears. When I was 26, I moved back to our old place to clean things out. It snowed again last night, and in the middle of the night, I woke up to that knocking. Bang, bang, bang. 3 times. I didn't open the door, but out in the snow by the window, that shadow was standing there again, its head down, like it was just waiting for me. My name's Rachel, and I'm 28 years old, from a family that's just riddled with stories. Growing up, I heard so many weird tales from my relatives, the screaming out on the ranch in Northern California, the whispers down by the Mississippi, the shadow at that lighthouse in Maine, the eyes in the Iowa cornfields, and that knocking at the foot of the mountains in Colorado. These stories got passed down like family heirlooms, but I never thought I'd stumble into my own nightmare out in the wilds of New Mexico. It was the summer I was 23, just after college. I decided to take a solo road trip through the Southwest, hoping to find some inspiration for a novel I was working on. One day in July, I drove out into the middle of nowhere. My GPS had conked out ages ago, and all there was on either side of the road was sand and dried up scrub brush. As the sun was starting to set, I saw this beat-up old shack in the distance, with a crooked barn leaning next to it. I pulled over, figuring I'd snap a few pictures, and wouldn't you know it, I got a flat tire. So, I was stuck there until morning, hoping someone would drive by. The shack was full of dust, the windows were busted out, and the wind whistled through the cracks like it was whispering. I sat down in this rickety old chair, scrolling through those family stories on my phone, trying to keep myself calm. But after dark, things got sideways. First, there was this scream coming from the direction of the barn, just like Jake's story from that night by the river, low and tearing. I froze, thinking it was just the wind, but then it came again, calling my name, Rachel. Rachel. I grabbed my flashlight and went over to the window. The barn door was hinging half open, and the inside was black as a hole in the ground. I thought about Amy's cornfield and, getting a bad vibe, decided against going out there. But before I could even breathe a sigh of relief, I heard footsteps outside, just like Jesse's night by the river, quick and kinda creepy, circling the house. I locked the door and huddled in a corner. The footsteps stopped, and then there was a knocking, bang, 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 3 times, just like Noah's mountain house. I held my breath. The knocking stopped, but then a pair of eyes appeared outside the window, black as ink, just hanging in the air, like Amy's scarecrow. I gritted my teeth, trying not to scream, but those eyes didn't leave, just stared at me, like they were waiting for something. Then, I heard this scratching on the roof, like that sailor Sam talked about, crawling around on the lighthouse. I just about lost it. I ran to the door, ready to bolt, but when I yanked it open, there was this shadow standing there, long arms dragging on the ground, no face, just like Noah's thing in the snow. I screamed and stumbled back inside. It didn't come in, just stood in the doorway, its head tilted down. The wind picked up, and I heard this whispering, "Come in. Come in." Just like Lena's story from the barn. I didn't move. When the sun finally came up, it was gone, but there was a circle of footprints in the sand all around the shack, like it had been marking me. I got my tire fixed and hightailed it back to the city, but the echoes of that night haven't left me. Last night, I dreamt I was back in that shack, and when I woke up, there was sand on my bed and a new picture on my phone, me out in the desert, with that shadow standing right behind me, staring at me like it was saying, "You can't get away."